Following up to a video I did a bit earlier on the dangers of not castling your king, I follow this up with a game where not castling and keeping the king relatively exposed has worked. And the purpose of this video is to show how difficult it can be to find the correct defense when making the decision not to castle. So on we go with the game. E4, G6, knight F3, bishop G7, D4, D6, pretty standard kind of development. Here the threat is knight G5 causing trouble here, although the move to E6 is still possible, so the different ways. But here I choose to play C6 castles. So now I've got to decide what to do, and I decide to go for the center and challenge his bishop. And so the idea here, if he takes, I take and quickly play a move like probably, depends if he checks or not, but probably very quickly eliminate his knight here, so the knight never gets on e5, and just eventually play e6 with a decent game. But here he chooses to sort of a gambit. Of course, it's not really a gambit, because if I take, the knight comes here, attacking both the f7 pawn and the e4 pawn. So I chose to kind of a counter attack against the center. What he did, he pushed, and then I went on e4. Now the idea here, of course, is not to put my pieces in sort of passive positions, and then it causes a traffic jam there with the knight not being able to get out. But also, there are ideas about preventing the bishop or the knight getting into the square. So it's just a counter-attacking move, which he meets with knight bd2, which is probably a good move. Here the computer recommends taking, which wouldn't be bad. But what I didn't like about taking is he would take with the knight and then play f4, and that can be dangerous. So I play bishop g4, and here I think it goes wrong, because he should be playing knight takes e4. We can actually even look at the variation. Knight takes here, and then h3. It gets a little bit messy, but bishop takes f3, g takes, if we take, the recommended move by the computer is queen d7, which is probably a good move. But if we take, let's have a look at the line, taking queen takes f3, and then we got e6. Well, it's holding, but it's not very pretty. Actually, the computer thinks that white is the equivalent of a pawn up here. So we go back to the position where he played after bishop g4, he played h3. And we're going to look now at what I played, which is knight takes here. He plays bishop takes d2, which is the best move. Then we have bishop takes, queen takes, and e6. That's the position that Black was trying to do, and with the idea of castling. But right now he decides to stop castling, so he will lose material for the purpose of stopping me from castling, which is a good idea. Now here I've got really there's two ways of doing it, which is The first one is to play the bishop to f8, and when he takes, you take with the king, and the king goes eventually to g7, reasonably safe. And you have a position where the knight, because of the pawns all on white, the knight is slightly better than the bishop here. So that was the idea. But here it gives me material, so I was in the mood, although it's not the way I normally play chess. I decided to test him and play f5. This is a 10-minute game, so not a lot of time for white to work out the attack, but by the same token, not a lot of time for black to work out the defense. So predictably he went here, and now a4 traps the bishop. So that's the idea. He reacted. He should really, what's recommended by computers to take here, although I'm not terribly sure I agree. But here he played c4, a decent move. Takes, and now of course he's open lines, and that's the sort of compensation for the material. He's open lines against my king eventually, because he's gonna get, if he could exchange a rook and put a rook on a8, this knight is in very big trouble. Now here, the computer recommended rook to a6, which I kind of don't like looking at it now. I didn't even consider it. What I did is exchange here. So I went for the exchange on the file, and when he took, I play knight here. Now we can have a look at what would have happened. Instead of rook takes a1, we can have a look at the line, and it's a little bit that's given by the computer. So he plays b4, and I'll eventually have the same problem, but here I've got time to play here. He plays here, so it's an extremely messy position. Bishop e7. Of course, you don't want to give him a pass pawn on d6. Supported pass pawn and massive advantage on dark squares. Castles. So in this line we managed to castle, but then we get hit with this. Swap. It's very, very, very difficult, this position. Here the computer, I think, recommended f5, b4, rook a8. Extremely uncomfortable to play as black, because you can't really take on d6 here. It gives in too much compensation, so you have to keep your bishop, and hopefully eventually you force him to take. But here there's a little bit of play by going back to f8, and it's a difficult game to play. So that was, instead of taking on a1, and now rook takes, knight a6, and he went c takes d. It's recommended that he, instead of c takes d5 after knight a6, after knight a6, it's recommended that he plays b4. And the line is quite long and exhaustive, and same kind of thing. Here he takes because should he push, there's a possibility for, if he pushes here, there is a exposed pawn here. So what you do in the first, you play bishop e7 like that, and later you can go after the pawn. But the fact that he's pushed like this has blunted his potential push on b5. So we go back to knight a6, and then we have c takes d5 instead of b4. Take on in the center, of course, predictable. And then he plays g4, which is not a particularly good move. and that's because he gives time to black to play just bishop back. Now this time he doesn't have any support of pawns on d6, and he must take, and that the king can do a runner now. He still tries to create play with e6, but that's met by f6, and when he plays the rook on e1, simply queen e7. It's tough defending, but it works. Here he played queen c3. The king has time to go to g7. Then he plays b4. Of course, he's been waiting a long time, but this time the knight just dropped on c7, and it has two purposes. The first one is to take here. The second one is to go here, attacking the central pawn on d4. Black has been careful right throughout this game not to open lines, because that can be very, very dangerous. So he goes to a3 and simply knight b5, and it's around here that he gets short of time. He starts getting short of time, and he rushes his move, and it's difficult for him to make a plan, although he's going to find a good one, which is to try to connect the pass pawn by presumably playing g4 and f5. So I played knight d6 to stop him, and then unfortunately he makes a bad move here. He goes fishing. He goes rook a1, and it would have been interesting to see what might have happened had he played, say, a move like g4. I had in mind to do something like that, but as you can see, he can connect his pawn. But then you go here. I mean, you don't exchange opening a file onto your king, and then he's not doing very well. What is he going to do? Rook e2, protecting his pawn. Then it's my turn to swing the rook into action, and I think that's objectively lost for white. So we go back to him playing rook a1, which just quite simply loses the pawn in the center. Then he goes fishing here on the queen side, but unfortunately there's nothing. Just simply it's possible to go crazy as black here and make mistakes. It's still, I mean, his rook is still potentially dangerous if it picks up that pawn. And so I withdrew my rook. Then he goes this way. So my idea now is to block the king side. Here it's very simple to play. We block the king side. We stop his king from going this way. And then we just go here and pick up the pawn on d4. There's no need to play crafty chess. It's very straightforward. So he goes up, closure of the king side, king f3, and it doesn't matter if he plays the king here or not, because the king is prevented from crossing the demarcation line by the rook. And then we have knight b5, picking up material, and he's got nothing. He's just waiting for the undertaker to turn up. Rook a5, and then you just flip the thing back here, and it's in this position that he resigned. So sometimes it's possible to grab material and not castle, but it's very, very difficult to defend.